What if you knew exactly who was next on America's most controversial execution list? Today, we will share the true stories of 21 prisoners scheduled for execution in the United States between 2025 and 2028 during a potential Trump presidency. We will discuss each defendant's background, the crimes they committed, their sentencing, and the planned execution methods. Let's begin with our first case. Marion Bowman Jr. grew up in a small town in South Carolina, facing hardships from an early age. His life was troubled, and he made choices that eventually led him down a dangerous path. In 2001, Marion was involved in a shocking murder when a friend, whose body was later found burned in a car trunk, lost his life in a violent dispute. The community was stunned as investigators uncovered that Marion had shot his friend during a heated argument. Fingerprints, lab tests, and witness statements all played a role in linking him to the crime. After a lengthy trial in which every piece of evidence was carefully examined, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder. On November 2, 1984, Marion was sentenced to death. The case gained significant attention because it marked the resumption of executions in South Carolina after a long pause caused by drug shortages for lethal injection. Marion's scheduled execution on January 31, 2025, will be carried out by lethal injection. In his final moments, he stated, "I did not kill Candy Martin," expressing a hope that his death might offer some comfort to the victim's family. Before his execution, he chose a hearty last meal, a plate of traditional fry bread, a bowl of slow-cooked beans, and a cup of black coffee, simple foods that reminded him of home and the life he once knew. With Marion's story now told, let's move on to the next case. Richard Lee Tabler, a Texas death row inmate, was convicted for a brutal double murder committed in 2004. This case is among the most controversial in recent Texas history. Tabler's crime involved the shooting death of a Killeen nightclub manager and the murder of a friend, with additional details later revealing his confession to killing 2 teenage girls from the same club. The evidence against him was strong, consisting of eyewitness accounts, forensic tests, and his admissions during the investigation. After a closely watched trial, the jury found Tabler guilty of capital murder. He was handed a death sentence on November 22, 1984, and his execution by lethal injection was scheduled for February 13, 2025. In his final moments before execution, Tabler spoke briefly, apologizing to the victims' families. His final words were, "I had no right to take your loved ones. I ask and pray that one day you find it in your hearts to forgive me." Although Texas no longer allows custom last meal requests, opting for a standard prison meal instead, Tabler's remorseful words resonated deeply with many. His case is noted not only for the horrific nature of the crimes, but also for the complex legal battles that prolonged his time on death row. As Texas continues to enforce capital punishment, Tabler's execution remains a focal point for debates over the fairness and humanity of the death penalty. Brad Keith Sigmon, a 67-year-old inmate from South Carolina, was convicted for a violent murder that occurred in 2001. Sigmon was held responsible for the brutal killing of his ex-girlfriend's parents, who were beaten to death with a baseball bat during an attack that shocked his community. Eyewitnesses and forensic evidence made his guilt unmistakable. His trial received extensive media coverage as his issue spotlighted deep issues of domestic violence and family tragedy. After a thorough examination of the evidence, Sigmon was found guilty of capital murder. The jury's decision led to a death sentence, and his execution is now scheduled for March 7, 2025. In a notable twist, South Carolina has recently reinstated the firing squad as an execution method due to difficulties in obtaining lethal injection drugs. If Sigmon is executed by firing squad, it will mark the first firing squad execution in the United States in 15 years, a decision that has drawn national attention. David Leonard Wood, known infamously as the Desert Killer, is a convicted serial killer from Texas. In 1987, Wood was found guilty of murdering at least 6 young women in El Paso, with their bodies buried in the desert. His gruesome crimes shocked the local community, and despite his long-standing claims of innocence, decades of appeals and legal challenges have not overturned his conviction. Wood's case has haunted El Paso for nearly 40 years, and his name remains synonymous with cruelty and injustice in the region. After extensive legal proceedings, a judge finally set an execution date for Wood. He is scheduled to be executed on March 13, 2025, at the Texas State Prison in Huntsville by lethal injection. Wood has been on death row since 1992, enduring years of appeals and media scrutiny. Due to changes in Texas policy, he will receive the standard prison meal on his final day instead of a custom last meal. This issue continues to evoke strong emotions among residents of El Paso. His lengthy time on death row and the enduring mystery surrounding his crimes have made this a symbol of unresolved pain for many families in the community. Jesse Dean Hoffman Jr. is a death row inmate from Louisiana whose case is marked by extreme violence and deep controversy. In 1996, Hoffman, then only 18 years old, was involved in the abduction, rape, and murder of 28-year-old Mary Molly Elliott in New Orleans. On November 26, 1996, Hoffman kidnapped Elliott at gunpoint from a parking garage, forced her to withdraw cash, and then drove her to a remote area where he raped and shot her in the head. His crime shocked the state and drew heavy media coverage, emphasizing the brutality of his actions. Hoffman was sentenced to death in 1998 after a trial that laid bare the gruesome nature of his crime. After years of legal delays, his execution is now scheduled for March 18, 2025. Louisiana has recently authorized the use of nitrogen gas, nitrogen hypoxia, as an alternative execution method due to shortages of lethal injection drugs. If this method is used, Hoffman's execution would be the first of its kind in Louisiana, adding a new dimension to the state's capital punishment debates. Aaron Brian Gunches is a 53-year-old inmate from Arizona, scheduled for execution on March 19, 2025. Convicted for the murder of Ted Price in 2002, Gunches was involved in a violent incident that also included the shooting of an Arizona state trooper during his escape in 2003. His crime took place on a desert highway where he abducted and fatally shot Price, an ex-husband of his girlfriend. The brutal nature of the crime, combined with his subsequent capture, led to his conviction and placement on death row. Originally sentenced to death in 2008, Gunches was resentenced in 2013 after several appeals. His execution has been rescheduled multiple times due to legal challenges and issues with securing lethal injection drugs. Notwithstanding these delays, Arizona officials have prepared pentobarbital for his upcoming execution. Edward Thomas, Eddie James, a 63-year-old death row inmate in Florida, is scheduled for execution on March 20, 2025. In 1993, James committed a horrifying double murder in Seminole County. During the crime, he broke into a home, sexually assaulted and strangled an 8-year-old girl, and then stabbed her grandmother to death. After fleeing the scene, James was featured on America's Most Wanted, which eventually led to his capture and conviction. After nearly 30 years on death row, this became the presentation of the long and painful legal process in capital cases. Governor Ron DeSantis signed his death warrant in early 2025, and James is set to be executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. Many in Florida view his lengthy stay on death row as an example of both the need for justice and the challenges facing the state's capital punishment system. This case has been widely covered in local news and remains one of Florida's first executions, scheduled in 2025. Wendell Arden Grissom, aged 56, is a death row inmate from Oklahoma, scheduled for execution on March 20, 2025. Grissom was convicted for a 2005 murder in which he shot 25-year-old Jeffrey A. Bourne during a heated dispute and later burned the victim's body in an attempt to hide the crime. The evidence against him was solid, with eyewitness accounts and forensic tests confirming his involvement. His trial was followed closely by local media, and his sentence was met with strong reactions from the community. After being found guilty of first-degree murder, Grissom was sentenced to death. Oklahoma resumed executions in 2021 after a long hiatus due to legal and logistical challenges, and Grissom's execution date was set as part of the state's effort to clear its death row backlog. He is expected to be executed by lethal injection, the standard method in Oklahoma. Grissom's story remains evidence of the long wait and the deep scars left on both victims' families and communities. Moises Sandoval Mendoza, 41, is a Texas death row inmate scheduled for execution on April 23, 2025. In January 2004, during a carjacking in San Antonio, Mendoza and an accomplice kidnapped 20-year-old Viridiana Viri Arellano. The crime took a brutal turn when Mendoza raped her and later stabbed her to death. Convicted in 2006, he has remained on death row ever since. His crime was widely reported in local news for its brutality and its emotional impact on the community. Texas has a strict policy regarding last meals. Condemned inmates receive the same standard meal as other prisoners. Therefore, Mendoza is not expected to have a custom last meal request. His execution is scheduled to be carried out by lethal injection at Huntsville. Mendoza's case is remembered for the sheer violence of his actions and the long legal battles that followed his conviction. His scheduled execution adds to the list of Texas capital cases, which continue to stir public debate about the death penalty and its application in modern society. Matthew Lee Johnson, 49, is a death row prisoner from Texas, scheduled for execution on May 20, 2025. In 2012, Johnson committed a particularly cruel crime in Fort Worth when he robbed the home of 79-year-old Lois Warnell and set her on fire. This horrific act shocked the community and drew widespread outrage due to its extreme nature. Witnesses testified about the brutality of the murder, and forensic evidence strongly linked Johnson to the crime. After a decade of appeals and legal challenges, Texas finally set an execution date for him. Johnson is slated to be executed by lethal injection at a Texas state prison in Huntsville. Due to changes in Texas policy, he will not be granted a special last meal and will instead receive the standard prison meal on his execution day. Although there is no public record of any final words from Johnson, he will have the opportunity to speak before the execution is carried out. It shows the cruelty that can occur in violent crimes, as well as the ongoing debate about the fairness and implementation of the death penalty in Texas. The tragedy of his actions continues to affect the families of the victims and the broader community in Fort Worth. Kwesi Bryan, aged 55, is an Ohio death row inmate whose case has drawn local attention for its tragic circumstances. Bryan was convicted of the 2000 murder of Cleveland police officer Wayne Leon during a routine traffic stop. In a shocking incident, Bryan shot Officer Leon in the face, an act that sent waves of grief throughout the community. Later, he also confessed to additional crimes, including unrelated rapes that further deepened the severity of his record. The strong forensic evidence and eyewitness testimonies left little doubt in the courtroom. After a lengthy trial and 2 decades on death row, Bryan's execution is now scheduled for January 7, 2026. Ohio plans to carry out his sentence by lethal injection, even though the state has repeatedly faced challenges with drug supplies. You can see the prolonged legal battles and the heavy toll that violent crimes impose on victims' families. As Bryan awaits his fate, his story tells us how lasting the consequences of such actions can be. Now, time to discuss the next story. Danny Lee Hill, now 59, is scheduled to be executed on July 22, 2026 in Ohio. Hill's case is one of the most notorious in the state due to the brutal nature of his crime. At just 18 years old, he committed the rape and murder of 12-year-old Raymond Fife in Warren, Ohio, a crime that shocked the entire region. Throughout the years, Hill's legal team has fought hard to delay his execution, arguing intellectual disability as a mitigating factor. Even with his appeals, the courts have upheld his conviction and death sentence, and his execution date now remains fixed. Ohio's long history of execution delays, primarily due to issues with lethal injection drug supplies, has meant that the issue has stretched on for decades. His upcoming execution by lethal injection is expected to be carried out under strict protocols. The situation became a focus of public debate on the fairness of capital punishment, especially for young offenders. Gerald "Bob" Hand, 77, is one of Ohio's oldest inmates on death row, with a history marked by multiple murders. Hand is infamous for his cold-blooded serial spouse killings. In 2002, he was convicted of murdering his fourth wife, Jill, along with a longtime friend, Lonnie Welch. Prosecutors presented evidence that Hand had orchestrated these murders in a scheme intended to cover up earlier crimes involving two previous wives. The trial exposed disturbing details of his long history of violence and manipulation. Convicted in 2003, Hand has spent nearly 2 decades on death row, exhausting all appellate remedies, with the Ohio Supreme Court affirming his sentence in 2006. His execution is scheduled for June 17, 2026, and will be carried out by lethal injection. It became a focal point in discussions about the ethics and effectiveness of the death penalty. His lengthy incarceration and repeated legal challenges disclose the complexities inherent in capital punishment. Let's see who is the next inmate on our list. Keith Lamar, also known as Bomani Shakur, is a controversial figure on Ohio's death row. Convicted for his role in the 1993 Lucasville prison uprising, Lamar was found guilty of murdering 5 inmate informants during a violent riot at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility. The case has attracted international attention, with many advocacy groups and anti-death penalty activists arguing that he was unjustly scapegoated for events that spiraled out of control during the prison uprising. Despite these claims, Ohio courts upheld his conviction, and Lamar has been on death row since 1995. His execution is scheduled for January 13, 2027, to be carried out by lethal injection. Lamar has stated that he intends to protest his innocence in his final words, a promise that has sparked debate among supporters and critics alike. His case remains one of the most discussed due to its complex background and the large public interest it continues to generate. Lamar's story highlights the contentious issues of prison violence and capital punishment in America. Cleveland R. Jackson is an Ohio death row inmate scheduled for execution on July 15, 2026. Jackson's crime shocked his community when, in 2000, he murdered a 3-year-old child and a 17-year-old teenager during an apartment robbery in Lima, Ohio. The brutality of his actions, including the burning of his victim's body, left a lasting scar on the community. Jackson's conviction was based on clear forensic evidence, witness testimony, and an overwhelming accumulation of proof that connected him to the crime. Since his sentencing in 2002, he has spent over 2 decades on death row, awaiting his fate amid a series of legal delays. His execution by lethal injection is now scheduled. This exemplifies the long and contentious road that death row inmates often travel. Jerome Henderson, convicted in 1985 for the murder and attempted rape of his neighbor Mary Akoff in Cincinnati, is set to be executed on October 21, 2026, in Ohio. On the day of the crime, Henderson broke into Akoff's apartment and carried out a violent attack that led to her death. The case was built on strong eyewitness accounts and forensic evidence, leaving little doubt about his involvement. Henderson's trial was marked by the intense emotions of those affected, and his sentence was handed down shortly thereafter. Over the decades, his execution date has been rescheduled several times due to the state's ongoing challenges with lethal injection drug availability. Scheduled for October 21, 2026, his execution will follow Ohio's standard procedure. Although we do not yet have confirmed details about his final words or last meal, his case has generated local discussion about the long delays in carrying out death sentences. Henderson's story is a powerful example of the enduring impact of violent crime on a community and the difficult process of legal resolution that follows such acts. Melvin D. Bunnell Jr., 67, is an Ohio inmate whose execution is scheduled for November 18, 2026. Bunnell was convicted in 1987 for the shooting death of Robert Bunner during a home invasion in Cleveland. It became notable for the substantial forensic evidence, including detailed ballistics reports, that linked him to the crime. Over the years, Bunnell has made multiple appeals, often seeking additional DNA testing in hopes of proving his innocence. Despite these efforts, courts have consistently upheld his conviction and death sentence. His execution by lethal injection is now scheduled for November 18, 2026. While details regarding his final words or his last meal remain unconfirmed, the issue sparked debate over the reliability of forensic evidence and the fairness of the appeals process in capital cases. Bonnell's long tenure on death row reflects the ongoing legal struggles in Ohio's capital punishment system. His case, with its repeated delays and persistent controversy, shows the challenges faced by those awaiting the ultimate punishment. Samuel Moreland, 59, is one of Ohio's longest-serving death row inmates, with his execution now scheduled for July 19, 2028. Moreland was convicted for a mass murder spree in Dayton in 1985, during which he killed 5 people, including 3 children. His crime left an indelible mark on the community and has caused lasting grief among the victims' families. Originally given an execution date in 2025, his warrant was repeatedly postponed due to Ohio's moratorium on executions caused by drug shortages. Finally, the state Supreme Court set a new execution date for 2028. Moreland will be executed by lethal injection, and although his final words or last meal details have not been confirmed, his long incarceration emphasizes the drawn-out nature of death penalty cases in Ohio. We can see the lingering impact of violent crime and the complex judicial process that often spans decades. As Moreland's scheduled execution approached, people started discussing the fairness of capital punishment in Ohio. Stanley T. Adams, aged 58, is scheduled for execution on February 16, 2028 in Ohio. Adams was convicted in 2001 for the murder of 43-year-old Esther Cook and her 12-year-old daughter, Ashley, in Warren, Ohio. His crimes involved a brutal assault that left both victims dead, and his trial revealed the extreme violence of the act. Despite numerous appeals and delays, mostly due to issues in obtaining lethal injection drugs, Adams's death sentence was maintained, and his execution date was moved from 2025 to 2028. Adams's scenario continues to raise serious questions about the death penalty's implementation in Ohio. His prolonged stay on death row has kept the issue in the public eye, sparking discussions on the efficiency and fairness of the capital punishment system. As we reflect on this case, we are reminded of the lasting impact of such crimes on communities and the families of the victims. Timothy Lee Coleman, 55, is an Ohio death row inmate scheduled for execution on October 30, 2025. Convicted for the 1996 murder of 23-year-old Melinda Stevens, killed to stop her testimony in a drug-related case, Coleman's crime deeply shocked the local community. Eyewitness reports and forensic evidence confirmed his involvement, leading to his conviction in 1997. Although he faced numerous appeals and delays, Coleman's execution date has now been set by the courts. He is scheduled to be executed by lethal injection, the standard method in Ohio. His long wait on death row stresses the drawn-out legal battles faced by many inmates. Coleman's case is often cited in discussions about the fairness of capital punishment, particularly regarding the lengthy delays that many prisoners experience. Finally, now it's time to shed light on the last case on our list. Kareem M. Jackson, 57, is scheduled for execution on December 10, 2025 in Ohio. Convicted for a double murder during a 1997 robbery in Columbus, Jackson was found guilty of killing 2 men to silence potential witnesses. The case against him was built on strong evidence, including multiple eyewitness accounts and thorough forensic analysis. Although he has filed numerous appeals over the years, Jackson's death sentence has remained in effect, and his execution is now set to be carried out by lethal injection. His case has been rescheduled several times due to ongoing issues with obtaining execution drugs, a problem that has affected many Ohio inmates. Jackson's long-standing presence on death row and the repeated delays in his execution continue to spark debate over the justice system. His story is a powerful reminder of the unresolved questions surrounding capital punishment and the human cost of lengthy legal battles. These 21 cases offer a detailed look at the prisoners scheduled for execution in the United States between 2025 and 2028 during a potential Trump presidency. Their stories, marked by complex backgrounds, brutal crimes, and long legal struggles, reveal the harsh reality of the death penalty. As these executions approach, they continue to fuel debate over justice, fairness, and the lasting impact on families and communities. Please share your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for watching.